It hadn't rained in over 3 weeks, and the dust clung to Asa McKinley's boots like guilt. He wiped his brow, staring out at the parched pasture that used to feed 6 head of cattle. Now there were none, just dry land, broken fence posts, and an old barn that leaned too far east like it was tired of standing. He hadn't touched the whiskey bottle in 4 months, but he thought about it every night, especially since Mary died. His neighbors said he was holding up well for a man who buried his wife last winter, but they didn't see what the nights looked like. How the house echoed now, how her absence sat heavier than her presence ever did. The quiet was a kind of ache. He barely spoke unless it was to his boy, Elijah, who had more questions about death than a 9-year-old should. Asa didn't have answers, just silence, and silence was a poor teacher. He still wore his wedding ring, though he often turned it around his finger when he thought no one was looking. The truth was, Asa had spent the last year barely getting by, scraping together enough to keep Elijah fed and the roof patched. What he didn't tell anyone was that he owed money, a lot of it, and the men he owed it to didn't take kindly to delays. The livestock auction over in Greeley wasn't a place for dreams. It was where struggling men went to chase second chances they couldn't afford. Asa hitched the wagon, left Elijah with old Mrs. Carver down the road, and made the long ride with just enough cash to buy a half-broke gelding, if he was lucky. But luck had been running thin lately. By the time he got to the auction yard, the sun was high and hot. The crowd was louder than usual, more restless. Asa waded through men yelling bids, sweat soaking through shirts, and the sour smell of cattle thick in the air. He kept his head down, eyes scanning for something solid, something that might save his season. But the horses were either too young or too wild, or too expensive. He'd just about decided to walk away when the sheriff climbed onto the platform and banged his fist for quiet. "Next up ain't livestock," the sheriff said, voice flat as gravel. "It's a person, female, picked up wandering near Devil's Fork. No name, no folks. Sheriff's office is auctioning her under vagrancy ordinance." The crowd shifted. A few men laughed. One shouted something Asa didn't catch. Then 2 deputies dragged a woman forward. She was young, maybe 19 or 20. Her dress was torn at the hem and stained with dirt. Long dark hair hung in a loose braid down her back. She didn't look up, just stood there like she'd already been through the worst of it. "No takers," the sheriff barked. "She can cook. Says she's good with sewing. We ain't running a charity here." Asa's mouth felt dry. The men around him whispered. Some were amused, others disgusted. A wrong number of men looked hungry in a way that made Asa's stomach turn. Then he saw it. Her hands. She was holding her belly, real low, like she was trying to hide it, but not well enough. She was pregnant, real far along, maybe 6 months, and nobody wanted her because of it. The bidding started slow, $2, then 3. A man in a brown hat offered 5. Another laughed and shouted 7 just to rile the crowd. Asa stood frozen. He didn't move until the man beside him elbowed his ribs and said, "Shame nobody's talking her. She'll end up in the brothel, knocked up and all." "Asa," someone called, "ain't you still got that big OL farmhouse with just a boy in it?" He didn't answer. His heart thumped like a hammer in his chest. This wasn't what he came for. He needed a horse, not a stranger, not someone else to feed, not a woman carrying another man's child. $10. Asa heard himself say. Heads turned. The auctioneer looked surprised. No one outbid him. "Sold," the sheriff said, almost like he didn't believe it. She was led down the steps and over to Asa. Her eyes met his for the first time. Green, not bright, but dull and guarded. He expected fear, maybe gratitude. What he saw was worse, nothing. She looked at him like she'd already stopped caring what happened next. Asa signed the paperwork, then climbed onto the wagon with her behind him. He didn't ask her name. She didn't offer it. They rode in silence, wind pressing at their backs, the wagon wheels creaking beneath them. He knew what people would say, that he'd lost his mind, bringing home a strange woman heavy with child, that he was chasing ghosts, trying to replace Mary. But he didn't care. Something in him, something old and half-buried, had stirred when he saw her standing there. Maybe it was pity, maybe something darker. By the time they got back, Elijah was already outside, throwing rocks at a fence post. When he saw her, he blinked. "Who's that? She's going to stay with us a while," Asa said. The woman stood beside the wagon, face pale, hands clenched. Elijah looked from her to his father. "Is she your wife?" Asa hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, she is now." She flinched, barely, but he saw it. Inside, she sat on the edge of a chair like she was afraid it might vanish. She didn't eat much, just picked at the stew Asa set down in front of her. When Elijah went to bed, Asa stayed up, watching the fire die in the hearth. She stood across the room, arms wrapped around her stomach like it was the only thing keeping her together. "You don't have to talk," he said quietly, "but I'd like to know your name." She didn't answer right away. Then, in a voice rough as sand, she said, "Hannah." He waited. When she didn't say more, he didn't push. That night, he laid a blanket on the floor in the front room and told her she could have the bed. She didn't argue, just walked past him without a word. Lying there in the dark, Asa stared at the ceiling. He could hear her moving upstairs, pacing maybe, or crying. He couldn't tell. He didn't sleep much. Not anymore. He hadn't rescued her. That wasn't what this was. He bought her. Same as a piece of land. Same as livestock. That truth sat heavy on his chest. But he also couldn't ignore the way she'd looked at him. Empty, resigned. Like someone used to being left behind. And somewhere deep down, Asa knew this wasn't the end of something. It was the start. And there'd be a price. One he hadn't even begun to understand. 3 weeks passed, and Hannah still hadn't said much beyond what was needed. She cooked, cleaned, and kept to herself. She hadn't touched Asa unless it was to hand him a plate or help lift a heavy bucket. She moved through the house like a ghost, quiet, pale, but always watching, especially at night when she thought nobody saw. Sometimes Asa would glance up from the table to find her eyes on him. Then she'd look away as if caught stealing something. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. But he had them. She kept a small pouch hidden under her mattress. He'd seen her open it once, late at night when he passed the room on his way to check the stove. Inside, she kept a worn piece of paper and a tiny bundle of cloth tied with string. He didn't ask. She didn't offer. Out in town, the whispers had already started. They always did. Some said Asa had gone soft in the head from grief. Others claimed the girl had cast some kind of spell on him. But one thing everyone agreed on: no man brings home a strange, pregnant woman for no reason. Not unless he's hiding something, or she is. Asa's oldest friend, Jeb Langley, came by one afternoon with a half-wild dog trailing behind him. Jeb had been a tracker once, back in the war. Since then, he lived mostly alone, though he kept his ear to the ground better than most. He leaned against Asa's porch rail, chewing tobacco and spitting into the dirt. "You know there's men asking about her," he said without looking up. Asa turned from where he was chopping wood. "What men?" "Strangers. Rode into town 2 nights back. One of them got a scar like a busted horseshoe across his chin. Asked the stable boy if he'd seen a girl, dark hair, pregnant, maybe traveling alone." Asa wiped sweat from his brow, heart ticking faster. "You tell them anything?" Jeb spat again. "I ain't stupid. Just thought you ought to know. This girl, she might be more trouble than you bargained for." Trouble. Asa didn't need more of that. His debts weren't getting any smaller. Every time he saw Randall Cotter, rancher, land shark, and the man Asa owed nearly $70 to, he felt the noose tighten. Cotter had stopped pretending to be friendly. Last week, he'd hinted that Asa might want to settle up before the season turned. Cotter showed up one morning uninvited, riding a sleek black horse and wearing that smug look he always wore when he knew he had the upper hand. Hannah saw him through the window and froze, her face draining of color. She disappeared into the back room before Cotter even dismounted. "Fine morning," Cotter said, tipping his hat. "How's the little wife?" Asa didn't return the smile. "What do you want?" "Just a neighborly visit," Cotter said, tying his reins to the fence. Thought I'd drop by, see if you've reconsidered selling off the north pasture. Might take that barn off your hands, too. It's not for sale. Cotter's grin slipped. You've got yourself a woman who don't talk and a boy who needs boots. Can't feed a family with pride. Asa? Asa stepped forward, jaw tight. I said no. Cotter's eyes flicked toward the house. You should know, one of my men said he saw a girl like yours working a saloon up in Eagle Rock about 6 months back. Pretty little thing. Belly wasn't showing yet. Strange coincidence, don't you think? Asa didn't answer. Cotter mounted up again, tipping his hat one last time. Clock's ticking, McKinley. Don't wait too long to make smart decisions. Inside, Asa found Hannah in a corner, pale and shaking. Do you know him? Asa asked. She didn't answer. Her hands gripped the arm of the chair hard enough to whiten her knuckles. Hannah. No, she said finally. Not him, but men like him. Asa didn't push, but his mind kept circling the same question. Who was she running from? Later that week, a stranger came to the farm asking for work. He was younger, tall with sunburned skin and a quiet voice. Said his name was Daniel Rusk. He'd been headed west, lost his horse in a flash flood, and was looking for board in exchange for labor. Asa studied him. There was something too clean about the way Daniel spoke. Polite, careful. His hands were rough, but his eyes were too sharp. Always watching, always reading the room. Asa didn't trust him, but he also needed the help. Winter wasn't far, and the fence line needed fixing. So he let the man stay in the shed out back, gave him tools, and paid him with food and shelter. Hannah didn't speak to Daniel. In fact, she avoided him altogether. But Asa noticed how she stiffened every time he was near. Daniel never stared at her the way other men did. He was respectful, but there was something under the surface. Something Asa couldn't name. Then came the night Elijah found the pistol. He was digging through an old cabinet in the barn, looking for nails when he pulled out a wrapped cloth. Inside, a revolver fully loaded. Asa knew immediately it wasn't his. He brought it into the house and laid it on the table. Hannah stood in the doorway, arms crossed over her belly. This yours? Asa asked. Hannah nodded. You planning on using it? If I have to, she said. On who? She didn't answer. Later that night, after Elijah had gone to bed, Asa stood by the fire while Hannah sat nearby, sewing a rip in one of his shirts. Her fingers moved slow and sure. You gonna tell me what you're hiding? I'm not hiding, she said softly. I'm surviving. He watched her for a long moment. There's a difference? Yes. Outside, coyotes cried somewhere in the hills. Hannah didn't flinch. Asa realized then she'd heard worse sounds, seen worse things. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one keeping secrets. Daniel started asking questions soon after. About Asa's debt, about the land, about Hannah. Always casual, like he was just making conversation. But Asa had learned to spot a man digging for something. One evening, while Daniel was mending fence posts, Jeb dropped by again. He glanced at Daniel working out back, then leaned in close to Asa. That man ain't who he says he is, Jeb said low. Saw him in Abilene 2 years ago. Went by a different name. Was mixed up in something bad, shooting, I think. Real messy. Asa felt the ground shift under him. Why's he here? Asa asked. Jeb shrugged. Could be he's running from something. Or after something. Asa didn't sleep much that night. The puzzle pieces were starting to slide into place, but none of them fit yet. Hannah was running from someone. Daniel might be following her, or maybe hiding from the same people. And Cotter, well, Cotter was just waiting to swoop in when Asa lost his grip on everything. Everyone had motives. None of them lined up. One thing was clear. Whatever Hannah was caught up in, it was bigger than vagrancy. Bigger than a girl with no home and a baby on the way. Asa looked out the window into the darkness. Somewhere out there, men were asking questions. And one day soon, they'd come knocking. When they did, someone was going to bleed. The air turned colder in the evenings, and the leaves began to brown at the edges. With each passing day, Hannah's belly grew rounder, and the silence between her and Asa began to fill in with small words and unfinished thoughts. She still moved carefully through the house, like she didn't belong there, but something had softened around her eyes. She stopped flinching when Asa entered a room. She no longer avoided Elijah's questions, either. She listened, even smiled sometimes when he talked about his dreams of building a treehouse or learning to shoot like his father. And Asa? He noticed it all. The way Hannah tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. The way she stood at the window at dusk, like she was waiting for something or someone to appear on the horizon. They started talking more, mostly in the evenings after Elijah had gone to bed. Nothing deep at first, just the kind of talk that passes time. But now and then, something slipped through. One night, Asa asked if she'd always lived in Colorado. She paused, then said, no, and he didn't push. Another night, she asked if Mary had been kind. Asa nodded, his voice thick when he said, yes. Too kind. It wasn't love yet. Not even close. But there was something there. A quiet trust beginning to take root. Daniel kept his distance. He worked hard, kept the fences up, chopped firewood, and always slept with one eye open. Elijah liked him well enough. But Hannah avoided him like he carried plague. Asa asked her once why. She looked at him and said, he reminds me of someone who never looked you in the eye when he lied. That stuck with Asa. Then came the first real snow. Light, but enough to dust the ground and remind them all what was coming. Asa had planned to ride into town to settle part of the debt, with Cotter using money he'd earned from selling off some tools and an old saddle. He wasn't paying at all, just enough to keep Cotter from pressing harder. But as he saddled his horse, Hannah stepped out onto the porch, her coat tight around her belly. Don't go today, she said. Asa looked up, surprised. Why not? She hesitated, choosing her words. I don't think it's safe. Asa narrowed his eyes. Did something happen? No, she said, but I felt it, like someone's watching. He didn't believe in feelings, but the look in her eyes made him pause. In the end, he stayed. The next day, Jeb rode out and told him that Cotter's place had been broken into during the night. No money taken, just papers. Jeb figured someone was looking for land deeds. Or blackmail. That was the first real victory. Asa hadn't even meant for it to be one, but it felt like he'd dodged something that was meant to snap around his neck. That night, Hannah couldn't sleep. Asa heard her pacing upstairs. When he went to check on her, he found her standing barefoot by the window, rubbing her stomach. He'd never seen her look so young, or so scared. Is it coming? He asked. She shook her head. Not yet, but close. He led her back to bed, and for the first time, she didn't wait until he left the room to cry. They were both carrying things they didn't know how to name. One night, a few days later, Elijah crawled into Asa's bed. He hadn't done that since Mary died. Huh, he whispered. Do you think Hannah's baby's going to be my brother? Asa wrapped an arm around the boy. I don't know, he said honestly. Can I help name him? Asa smiled in the dark. Yeah, I think you should. The next morning, Asa found Hannah sitting by the stove with a scrap of paper in her lap. She was writing down names. He didn't say anything, just sat beside her. After a while, she passed him the paper. There were 3 names on it. 1 for a girl, 2 for a boy. All of them simple. All of them names that could belong to someone good. That was the second victory. Small, quiet, but it felt like something healed a little in that moment. Then Daniel made a mistake. It was near dusk when Asa came back from checking the traps near the creek and found Daniel going through Hannah's room. The door was open, and Hannah was outside hanging laundry. Asa stepped in without a sound. What are you looking for? He asked coldly. Daniel didn't even flinch. Answers. Asa took a step forward. You didn't lose your horse, did you? Daniel straightened. No. Then who sent you? Daniel looked at the floor. I didn't come to hurt her. But you came for her. I came because she's not who she says she is. That night, Asa locked Daniel out of the house. Hannah didn't ask what happened. She already knew. She just sat by the fire, her hands folded tight over her belly. Asa wanted to ask her everything then. Who she was running from. What Daniel knew. Why she carried a gun and flinched every time she heard hoofbeats. But he didn't. He just sat with her. And then she told him. Her voice barely carried over the crackle of the flames. She was 17 when she married a man named Thomas Gale in Missouri. He was older, charming, and wealthy. She thought she'd won the lottery. Turned out he was cruel and dangerous. When she got pregnant, she thought it might soften him. It made him worse. She left in the middle of the night, stole his revolver, and ran west. He'd sent men after her before. Daniel was one of them. But he changed his mind, she said. He stopped trying to bring me back. Now I think he just wants to make sure I disappear. Asa felt like something cold passed through his chest. Why now? Because I'm alive, she said. And I know what he's done. It was more than fear now. It was justice. Hannah wasn't just running from a husband. She was running from a man who didn't want the truth getting out. Asa sat back, staring into the fire. The stakes were no longer just debts and gossip. They were life and death. For Hannah, for her baby, for all of them. He stood, walked over, and pulled her gently to her feet. For the first time, he held her close. "We'll keep you safe," he said. "Not I. We." That night, as the wind howled outside and the fire burned low, Asa knew the past was coming for them. And they weren't ready yet. But they would be. They had to be. The first real snowstorm came without warning. One moment the skies were calm and gray. The next, a hard wind swept in from the north, dragging heavy clouds behind it. By dusk, snow was falling so thick Asa could barely see the barn from the front porch. He and Elijah hurried to cover the tools and check on the animals while Hannah struggled to shutter the windows against the cold. Daniel was gone. He'd left 2 days earlier without a word. Asa had found his bedroll and rifle missing. That should have made him feel safer. But it didn't. Inside, Hannah moved slower now, her belly round and tight under her wool coat. She winced when she bent too far or stood too quickly. Asa kept watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. She knew what he saw. Her body was preparing for something big. She could feel it. The storm pinned them inside for 3 days. With the road buried under snow and the wind howling through the cracks in the walls, it felt like time slowed. Elijah stayed close to the hearth, drawing pictures of what he thought the baby might look like. Hannah did her best to stay calm, but Asa could tell she was bracing herself for birth, for pain, maybe for worse. On the 4th morning, the storm passed. The world outside was white and silent. Asa saddled the horse and told Hannah he was riding into town to check supplies and leave word with Jeb in case Daniel showed his face again. Hannah didn't try to stop him this time. She just said, "Be careful," and touched his sleeve, her fingers trembling. Town looked nearly buried. Most shops were still shuttered, and the saloon had a frozen door Asa had to kick open. Inside, Jeb nursed a bad cough and said the cold had killed 2 men on the ridge. "You're lucky you stayed put," he muttered through the steam of his coffee. But then Jeb leaned forward and added, "You're not going to like this, Asa. That man, Cotter, he's been sniffing around the sheriff again. Word is he's pushing to have you declared unfit to manage the land with that much debt and a child to feed." Asa clenched his jaw. "He doesn't care about the land. He wants to bury me." Jeb nodded. "Yeah, and he's not the only one asking questions. A letter came for you, marked from Missouri. I didn't open it, but I saw the name, Thomas Gale." Asa's blood turned to ice. He took the letter and rode hard for home, the wind biting through his coat. The path was slick, and twice he nearly lost the horse in the drifts. By the time he reached the house, night was falling, and the world had gone gray again. Inside, the fire was out. There were footprints around the porch. Not his, not Elijah's. He burst through the door with his rifle raised. Hannah was in the kitchen, standing with her back to the wall, her face white as the snow outside. Elijah stood behind her, holding her hand, tears on his cheeks. The man at the table turned slowly. Scarred jaw, cold eyes. Not Daniel. Someone older, rougher. "Evening, Mr. McKinley," he said, tipping his hat without standing. "You got something that belongs to my employer." Asa didn't lower the gun. "Thomas Gale." The man smiled. "He sends his regards." Hannah stepped forward. "If you take me, the baby will die," she said. "You know that." "Not my concern," the man said. My job's to bring you back breathing. That's all. Asa fired a warning shot just past the man's ear. The sound shattered the tension in the window behind him. The man stood slowly, hands raised. You shoot me, he said, and more will come. Let him, Asa growled. The man backed out the door, slow and steady, until he disappeared into the snow. Asa bolted it shut behind him, then turned to Hannah, who had collapsed to her knees, gasping. My water, she whispered. It broke. The next hours were a blur. They boiled water, gathered cloth, laid her on the bed. Asa had never felt so helpless in his life. Elijah tried to be brave, but cried quietly by the door. The labor came fast and hard. Hannah gripped Asa's hand like it was the only thing holding her to the earth. She screamed into the blankets, her body racked with pain. Blood. So much blood. Asa thought she was dying. And then, just before dawn, the baby arrived. A girl. Small. Alive. But Hannah didn't open her eyes. He held the child, shaking, while Elijah watched in awe. Is she okay? The boy asked. Asa couldn't speak. Then Hannah moaned, soft and weak, and opened her eyes. She saw Asa, saw the baby, and smiled. That was their first breath of peace. But it didn't last long. By the next afternoon, Daniel returned. His face was scraped and bruised, his clothes soaked, but he came with news. Gail's coming, he said without preamble. I saw him. He's on the trail with 2 more men. They plan to reach you by the week's end. Asa stared at him hard. Why are you here? Daniel looked down. I changed my mind. You waited too long. I know. Hannah was resting with the baby when Asa told her. She didn't cry. She just stared at the wall. I always knew it would end like this, she whispered. No, Asa said. It won't. That night, he met with Jeb and 3 other ranchers. Men who owed nothing to Cotter and had no love for outsiders pushing women around. They made a plan. It wasn't clean, but it didn't need to be. Over the next 2 days, they built traps in the woods near the road, covered them with snow, posted a watch on the ridge. Daniel stayed too, quiet and watchful, maybe trying to make things right, maybe trying to prove something to himself. Meanwhile, Hannah regained her strength. She nursed the baby with a fierce focus. Asa saw something new in her now, a fire, a kind of steel that no man had been able to break. And he found something new in himself too, a need to protect that fire. Not just because of what she'd suffered, but because she was his now, in a way words couldn't explain. Then Cotter came, not with the law, with a lawyer. He arrived in a black buggy, dressed in fine wool, and walked up to Asa's porch like he owned it. I hear you've been housing a fugitive, he said, smug. I hear you've been talking to a murderer, Asa answered. Cotter didn't flinch. I don't care what she's done. What I care about is death. And you've made some poor choices. He handed Asa paper. If you can't pay by the end of the week, I'm taking this land. Asa didn't look at it. He just stared Cotter down. You're not getting this land. And you're not getting her. Cotter turned and walked away. We'll see. That night, Daniel disappeared again. This time, Hannah cried. I trusted him, she said, even when I knew better. Asa held her. He's not the man who matters. But he felt the weight of what was coming. Gail, Cotter, the law, and maybe worse. He spent that night awake, watching the fire burn low, holding his daughter in one arm, while Hannah slept beside him. There was no room left for fear. Only choices. If Gail came, he would fight. If the law came, he would stand. And if Cotter tried to steal the last of what he had, he would burn everything down before he handed it over. Because this wasn't about land anymore. This was about a family. About a woman who'd survived the worst and still found a way to love. About a boy who deserved more than fear. And about a man who'd already lost everything once and swore he'd never lose it again. The snow outside fell softly, but inside, Asa was already bracing for war. The days that followed moved like a fuse burning towards something explosive. Every sunrise brought more tension, more watching the tree line, more listening for hoofbeats in the distance. Hannah, still pale and tender from the birth, stayed mostly in bed with the baby in her arms. She named the little girl Ruth, and every time she said the name, it sounded like a promise. Asa kept to the porch in the barn, working through the cold, loading rounds into his rifle, checking the snares they'd laid in the woods. Elijah shadowed him in silence, no longer asking questions, just watching, like he was trying to learn how to be a man before the world gave him a chance to grow into one. The third day after Cotter's visit, Daniel came back. He walked up to the house just as the sun was dropping low behind the trees. He looked different, calmer, maybe, or more resolved. He carried no weapon, just a satchel slung across his back and a raw truth in his eyes. "I found them," he said before Asa could even speak. "They're camped 2 miles down near the canyon rim. Gale's waiting till nightfall. Says he wants to end this undercover." Asa didn't ask how Daniel knew. Didn't ask if he was telling the truth this time. He just looked the man square in the face and said, "You coming with me? Or, is this your parting gift?" Daniel took a breath. "I'll come. I owe her that." Asa nodded once, then went inside to say goodbye. Hannah sat up as he entered, Ruth asleep against her chest. Her hair was loose, her eyes heavy. "Is it time?" she asked softly. He knelt beside her, touching her hand. "It's not supposed to be like this," he said. "But it is," she whispered. "Don't let him take me back." "He won't." She leaned forward, kissed his forehead. "Promise me, Asa, if I don't make it, promise me you'll raise her right. And don't let her be afraid of her own shadow." "You'll make it," he said, but his voice cracked. Outside, the sky went dark. Asa and Daniel took their rifles and rode out under moonlight, following the tree line until the land dropped into deep shadows near the canyon. The air was dead still. Even the animals were quiet. They saw the fire first, just a small glow between the trees. Then the voices. Laughter. Men who didn't expect to fight. Asa crept closer, heart pounding so loud he swore the trees could hear it. He counted 3 men. One was Gale, older now, graying at the temples but still sharp. The other 2 looked younger. One polished a knife. The other smoked and leaned back on a saddlebag. Asa didn't wait. He stepped from the shadows, rifle leveled, voice cold. "Thomas Gale." The fire crackled. The men froze. Gale looked up slowly, a smirk rising to his lips. "Well," he said, "I was hoping you'd show." Daniel emerged beside Asa. The knife polisher rose to his feet, hand on his holster. "Don't," Asa warned. Gale stood, brushing off his coat. "I assume she told you lies. They always do. She told me enough." Gale's smile turned dark. "Then you know she's unstable. Violent. She nearly killed me. She ran," Asa said. "From you. For what you did. And who the hell are you?" Gale snapped. "Some grieving rancher who thinks a ruined girl is going to fix what he lost." Asa stepped closer. "No, I'm the man who's going to bury you if you come near my family again." That word, family, rang louder than the wind. Gale motioned to the younger man. "Take him." But Daniel moved first. He tackled the man with the knife, sending both crashing to the ground. The other man reached for his gun. Asa fired first. The shot echoed through the trees, and the man dropped. Gale lunged forward, drawing a small pistol from his coat. But Asa was faster now, filled with a kind of fury he hadn't felt since Mary died. He kicked the weapon from Gale's hand and drove him to the ground. The 2 men struggled in the dirt, rolling near the fire. Gale fought like a man possessed, biting and clawing. But Asa had something Gale didn't, something broken that had finally hardened into steel. He pinned Gale down, fist raised. "You came to my home," Asa growled. "You threatened my son. You put your hands on her." Gale spat blood. "She's mine." "No," Asa said, voice shaking. "She was never yours. You beat her. You hunted her. And now you'll answer for it." Daniel dragged the other man off, leaving Asa and Gale alone in the clearing. "I should kill you," Asa whispered. Gale sneered. "Then do it." Asa held his fist in the air for a long moment. Then slowly he lowered it. "No," he said. "You don't get to disappear that easy. You're going to face what you did. He stood, yanked Gale to his feet, and shoved him toward Daniel. "Tie him up." By dawn, they brought Gale into town, bloody and bruised. Jeb met them near the sheriff's office, blinking in disbelief. "Who the hell is this?" "Thomas Gale," Asa said. "Wanted for attempted kidnapping, spousal abuse, and God knows what else. I suggest you wire Missouri." The sheriff stepped out, called in by the noise. After some quick words and a look at Gale's state, he took the man into custody. It didn't feel like victory. Not yet. Asa returned home by noon. The snow was melting now, spring beginning to tease at the edges of winter. The house was quiet when he entered. Hannah sat by the fire, Ruth sleeping at her chest. Elijah looked up from the floor, where he was carving a wooden bird. Asa sat beside Hannah, his body aching. "It's done," he said. She looked at him a long time. Then her face crumpled, and she began to cry. Not loud, not wild, just a deep, silent letting go. Asa held her, and for the first time, he cried too. They didn't speak much that day. Words had already done enough damage. That night, as the wind died down and the fire burned soft, Asa watched Ruth sleep. He touched Hannah's hand. She didn't pull away. "I'm not her," Hannah said softly. "I'm not Mary." "I know," Asa replied. "You're Hannah, and you came back. I didn't have a choice." "You did, and you stayed." The silence between them was full now. Not with fear, with truth, with the kind of knowing that only comes after pain. Later, Elijah climbed into bed with them, curled against Asa's side. "Is everything okay now?" he asked. Asa looked at Hannah. She looked at the baby, and they both nodded. "Yeah," Asa said. "I think we're going to be okay." Outside, the snow dripped from the roof, and the first bird of spring called from the trees. Something had ended, but something else, something fragile and worth protecting, had just begun. Spring came slow but steady, each day peeling away the bitter hold of winter. The snow melted first around the barn, revealing the worn path Asa took every morning to check the stalls. Then the fields softened, and hints of green broke through the frozen soil. Life was coming back, not just in the earth, but inside the house too. Hannah was the first to rise now, even before the sun. She moved with more ease, her steps no longer heavy with pain or fear. Ruth was nearly 2 months old, her cheeks full, her eyes bright and curious. She watched the world with a quiet, serious focus, like she already knew it was a place where pain and beauty lived side by side. Hannah swore Ruth recognized her voice already, the way the baby turned toward her every time she sang softly while rocking by the hearth. Elijah took to the baby like she was his own sister, even though he still worried she might cry if he held her wrong. He'd sneak into the room just to lay his hand on her tiny back and whisper stories he made up, stories about brave girls and horses that could fly. Hannah never told him a hush. Those stories were part of the healing too. Asa had taken to working longer hours outside, not out of avoidance, but necessity. The land had waited long enough for a strong hand. There was a new fence to build and soil to till. He cleared the back acreage, dug out stones by hand, and marked the spot where they'd plant corn when the rains came. Every post he set, every gate he fixed, felt like carving a future out of all the chaos that had come before. Daniel hadn't stayed. After Gale was handed off to Missouri authorities and Cotter withdrew his petition for Asa's land, quietly, without apology, Daniel rode out with nothing more than a nod and a soft, "You don't owe me anything." Asa didn't stop him. They weren't brothers. They weren't friends. But they fought the same fight for the same woman. That counted for something. The sheriff stopped by once to confirm that Gale had been charged in St. Louis with a host of crimes and was awaiting trial. Hannah sat stiffly during the visit, not because she was afraid, but because she didn't want to let the law define the end of her story. Gale's punishment was necessary, but it wouldn't be what healed her. She knew that now. Healing had to come from somewhere else. One morning in late April, Asa found Hannah in the garden, kneeling in the soft dirt. She was planting a row of bluebells she'd found growing wild by the stream. Ruth was bundled beside her in a basket, shaded by Hannah's shawl. Hannah's sleeves were rolled up, her hands covered in earth. She looked up at Asa and smiled, sunlight catching the lines that pain had etched in her face but couldn't hold forever. I used to think I'd never stay still long enough to grow anything, she said. He crouched beside her, pressing his fingers into the soil too. Guess we're both learning. She studied him then, quiet for a moment. Why didn't you leave? After Mary, after everything? He stared at the sky, trying to find the words. Because even when everything hurt, this land still felt like the only place where things might make sense again. I didn't know how, but I believed it. Hannah reached over, brushing dirt from his cheek. I believe it now, too. That evening, Asa set up the old table outside under the open sky. They ate there with Elijah and Ruth between them, the baby wrapped in a blanket and dozing peacefully. Elijah laughed louder than usual, telling a story about a fox he'd seen in the woods. Hannah listened with her chin resting on her hand, and Asa watched them both, realizing something deep in his chest had finally quieted. Later that week, Asa came in from the field with a wooden box he'd built by hand. It was simple, smooth, and painted with the same deep red Mary had once chosen for their bedroom wall. Inside, wrapped in soft linen, was a small necklace. A locket, nothing fancy, just something he'd picked up in town and carved initials into, RW for Ruth West. Hannah opened it slowly, tears in her eyes. She's not mine by blood, Asa said, but she's mine, and you are too, if you want to be. Hannah didn't say anything at first. She closed the locket, pressed it to her chest, and then stepped into his arms, holding him like she'd finally stopped running. There was no proposal, no talk of marriage or papers. Just two people choosing each other day after day. That was enough. On the first truly warm day of the season, Hannah asked Asa to take her to the ridge behind the house, the one where the cottonwoods grew thick and the land fell away into a long, sweeping view of the valley. Elijah came too, carrying a basket. They laid out a blanket, let Ruth sleep in the shade, and shared cold biscuits and apple slices. The wind moved through the grass like a lullaby. Hannah pointed to the spot where the land dipped gently into a hollow. I want to build something there. Not a home, just a space. For women who've had to run like I did. Asa nodded slowly. We could do that. Make something that lasts. She looked at him, her eyes strong. I don't want my past to be a wound anymore. I want it to be a reason. He reached for her hand and squeezed it. Then we'll start with that. And so the days kept coming, each one a little lighter. They began clearing the land for the shelter. Hannah worked with Jeb's wife to gather supplies, and word spread quietly that something new was being built out on the McKinley land. Not just for healing crops, but for healing people too. Elijah started school in town, walking there with two other boys from nearby homesteads. He came home dusty and wide-eyed, telling Hannah everything he learned while she rocked Ruth and smiled like the world was finally opening instead of closing. Even the house began to feel different, not because of the paint or the new door Asa built, but because of the laughter. There was music again, Hannah's voice humming while she folded laundry, Elijah tapping out rhythms with spoons. And Asa, once silent and buried in grief, found himself whistling without meaning to. On the morning of Ruth's first birthday, Hannah baked a small cake with the last of the winter flour. Elijah picked wildflowers. Asa whittled a tiny wooden horse. They lit one candle and sang softly, not for the sake of the baby, who clapped and gurgled and tried to eat the candle wax, but for themselves, for surviving, for choosing each other, even when it would have been easier to walk away. That night, after Ruth was asleep and Elijah tucked in, Hannah and Asa stood on the porch, arms wrapped around each other, the stars sprawling across the sky like a promise. Do you think it's possible, Hannah asked, her voice low, to be born again? Not in some holy way, just new. He looked at her, brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. I think it's the only way we ever really survive. She nodded, leaning into his chest. Then I think I finally have. There was no grand ending, no fireworks, no miracles, just a man who'd buried one family and somehow helped build another. Just a woman who'd escaped hell and planted something gentle in its place. And a boy and a baby who would grow up knowing that even in a world full of cruelty and loss, love, quiet, steady, hard-won love, could still take root and bloom.